Hey everyone, welcome. Michael here, back with another episode of our Street Smart Ventures podcast. I am so pumped, as always, beyond measure to have our special guest today, Brad Girard. Brad, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Man, I'm grateful. Any day with Michael is a good day, so thanks.
No, I feel the same, Brad. And so, for our listeners, I'm going to let Brad introduce himself. Before we hit the record button, I was thinking, I'm looking over your bio, Brad. I'm just in awe of just the great work you do as director of the Chase program at Families Together. I'll let you introduce yourself in a second, but Brad's just super dynamic. We met at a conference, the CBI, back in May, Capacity Building Institute. And just, Brad, you feel like you're someone I've known for a long time. And, we've only really known each other, again, since this past May, and really just collaborated on, our recording with your Chase Your Dreams podcast. So I'm just super pumped for our time together.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. I hope this podcast stands up to the last one we did because your answers were so insightful and fun to talk to. I hope I can do this one service as well. But I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Oh no, no, you're gonna be amazing, and I'd love for you to just take a minute to introduce yourself and just introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, sounds good. So again, my name is Brad Girard, and I think it's funny because in the past I would have probably introduced myself as the program director for Chase, but really the primary roles that come to mind first and foremost are being a dad. So I
Mm-hmm.
have a 2-year-old daughter, and that obviously saps up a lot of my mental space and energy these days. I'm also a proud husband. I got married in February and have an awesome partner. So those are two areas that rank really high on how I describe my current roles in life. But as far as work goes, I'm the program director for the Chase program, and Chase is one program out of about six at Families Together Inc. And Families Together is the parent training and information center in the state of Kansas. And so every state would have a federally designated parent training and information center, at least one. Some of the states, California, I think, has four or five because it's a huge state. But there's only one in Kansas, and we receive our funding federally, but also from some state grants, also from donations, like a lot of nonprofits. And really, our work centers on educating and empowering families and youth with disabilities. So we spend a lot of our time thinking about things like how advocacy works within the IEP and 504 context. We think a lot about how to help parents navigate the education and the health systems. My role specifically is largely to support youth. The Chase team has kind of taken on almost like this youth wing aspect of Families Together, and we've grown a lot over the last couple of years, and very proud to say that we have a team of, I think, 6 or 7 at this point, whereas we started with just myself and Leah. So that has, of course, come with growing pains, but it also is a way to introduce new people into the mix who have different skills and different perspectives. And so it's been really fulfilling to see the work grow in ways that I just couldn't do myself. So, yeah.
Wow, that's incredible, Brad. And I love that you opened on a personal note because you're right. I think that's cool because you're right. The like, if you asked me, oh, Michael, tell me about yourself. You're right. I in the past would have answered work first, and I think that kind of leads me to a larger conversation. Is I think it's so cool to see. Because we bonded immediately over our shared values. I think values in our past podcast chat, right, Brad, really was just a huge amount of time being spent on values and what's true to me as Michael, what's true to you as Brad, and we're just opening up a big conversation on, there's so much going on in the world, and we have such limited time on this earth that I feel like it's just so imperative that we spend time to figure out who are we, what do we want, what makes us happy. And so, like, I've been thinking a lot about like life design, that our Street Smart Ventures team, really spends a lot of time in our programming and growth on. So I love that you mentioned, clearly one of your top values is family, and I love that, and I think that's just amazing to hear. Congratulations on just having a fulfilling relationship and family life.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's kind of funny. Yesterday, I gave a presentation at youth. It's called Youth Leadership Forum, and it's
Mhm.
presented by this organization called Kansas Youth Empowerment Academy, and they do this annual thing. And right when I got there, they had one of the young adult allies interviewing people who were going to be presenting so that they could give a proper intro before they took the stage. And so right when I got there, they were interviewing me, and they had asked me who my biggest mentors were in life. And I sat there, and I really wanted to come up with, famous entrepreneurs or athletes or something, but the people that really came to mind were my two parents. And
Hmm.
the work ethic that is modeled from my dad and the generosity that is modeled from my mom, and being able to just be witness to that for so many years in my life has really informed, like you said, my values and how I try to lead my team. And so, yeah, family is super important to me. And I guess that's helpful within the work context too, because we are families together as an
Hmm.
organization. And, we're kind of focused on how to help maintain healthy family units. So I appreciate you picking up on that.
Yeah, and I'm curious. So, what in your work? Because I may have mentioned this a little bit in our past recording, but I worked for a few years at Connecticut's PTI CPAC, Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center. So I'm very familiar with parent centers and all the great work they're doing, and I just think they fulfill such a need that they're really touching on, you're right, supporting families, parents, guardians, supporting youth and young adults, and just I think the blend of creative programming that you're seeing, but also just guidance and support from parent consultants who are just giving factual information, or even just a reassuring phone call, or meeting support and presentation. So I don't think enough people know about Parent Information Training Center. So we'll be sure, when we upload this podcast, we're going to connect you to obviously highlight Brad and Families Together, and everything Brad wants to highlight. I will not leave you hanging, Brad, but also make sure you all know about your local parent information training centers wherever you're located.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there's, no two PTIs operate exactly the same way. And I can only speak to my experience at Families Together. But what I do know is that we have a lived experience. Everyone who works at Families Together either has a disability themselves or is touched within their own family unit by someone with a disability. And so when you do call in to Families Together and most PTIs, you're going to connect immediately with someone who has walked a mile in your shoes. And they're probably going to be able to offer you a lot more than just what you would consider kind of the meat and potatoes of PTI work. So, yeah, you might call and try to learn a little something about the IEP process.
Hmm.
You might also learn that they have a parent to parent network, so that if you're someone, let's say, who is involved in foster care or the justice system, they can connect you with parents who have been in that same position.
Hmm.
They might also have health grants that they're operating under. We're partnering with Kansas Oral Hygiene right now to bring oral hygiene to prominence in Kansas. So there's just a broad swath of things that PTIs do that aren't so specific to what you think they might. And so
Hmm.
I always just encourage people to pick up the phone and ring in there and learn a little something.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, and that's incredible. And I think I was immediately struck by, before we met, I had heard about you, Brad, and like all good things, I promise. Whenever someone says that to me, I immediately like freeze up inside. I'm like, oh my god, what did you hear? Because you never, you never know. But I've heard so many amazing things about you, Brad, and every single one was true from when we emailed and we did our recording. Just getting to know you over these past couple months, it's been a true pleasure, honestly. And I said this before. I just what struck me, I think, besides your passion, was your commitment to innovation, and hearing all that you're doing. What does innovation mean to you, and how do you really stay so creative, maybe amongst the pressures of everyday life, or whether it's work or personal? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I appreciate that. I think my mind goes to my history as a musician. So I come from a background of gigging around in bands, and I picked up a guitar for the first time when I was like 12 or 13 years old. So I've been playing music for a long time. And when you're in that world, naturally you're attracted to creative types. And so, when you make music, you don't just need a band, but you might also need an album cover, and you might need a photographer to take a picture of the band. You might need a multimedia type person or a promotional type person to get the work out there. And so you end up interacting with a lot of different creative people. And so over the years, I think one of the things that keeps me creative is just amassing this network of creative people that are constantly inspiring me. And so I can't say that all my ideas are somehow mine. I think true innovation is trying to riff on someone else's idea or collaborate with someone else on an idea that you've never tried before. I think it's being willing to make mistakes despite what other people might think. And I also think there is a lot more flexibility within things like education and nonprofit grants than you might expect. And so, for example, we teach a music and an arts program at an alternative school in the high school area. No one on our staff has a teaching accreditation or anything, but because we had a good reputation as the PTI and because we had a solid relationship foundation with the principal and with the superintendent, we were warmly welcomed into an educational environment to teach skills that we have. You know, things like how to freelance if you're interested in that career, how to make, you know, how to make actual money off of making music and not just having it be a hobby. And so, innovation to me is kind of developing a daily practice of some level of creativity, whether that's an instrument, a walk around the park just to brainstorm without AirPods in, or a podcast playing in the background. No shade. I guess if it's the Street Smart Ventures, maybe that'll that's okay. But yeah, just making space for yourself to remain open to inspiration from others. Also, fuel your own creativity with whatever it is that you're excited about. And then really take risks because you never know who's open to an idea. And so it's not fair to yourself or others just to assume that you can't do X, Y, and Z within X, Y, and Z system. So yeah, that would be my thoughts there.
No, I love that. You've got me thinking now. Like, I kind of want to ask you, Brad, if you're okay with this. Like, was there a risk you're comfortable sharing that you took? Maybe a risk you took that was like, oh shoot, it didn't go the way I thought, or like maybe you won't talk about a risk. Like, yeah, like I was maybe terrified, but like it turned out amazing. And talking about the innovation and risk and like all those threads together.
Yeah, yeah, let's do it. The one that comes to mind. So before I was at Chase, I was trying to get a few entrepreneurial endeavors kind of off the ground, and I was still very much so in the freelance music world where I was just trying to get paid songwriting gigs and I was playing shows here and there. Well, this opportunity came around to work for a company called Songfinch, and if you've never heard of Songfinch, they're based out of Chicago, and they do custom occasion songwriting. So if you want a song about your dog, or you want a song about your fiance or a birthday coming up, you can hire a professional musician to write and record your story and put it to music. And so I had been hired on to Songfinch as a temp, and I was doing music supervision, is what they were calling it, and I was like, sweet, yes, I do deserve a supervisor role within this music world. I've been doing this a long time. I didn't realize that this was just going to be listening to 100, 150 songs a day, vetting them for accuracy. It was so not glamorous. It was kind of actually hard on my inspiration because I was just getting sick of listening to music. But because I feel like I have a natural work ethic that I learned from my parents, I did well at the job, and Songfinch offered me a permanent position on their corporate team. And I had this moment, kind of this crossroad where I was like, all right, I can't do this to myself. I love this company. They're so innovative. They're so cool. They've been good to me, but this is going to crush my soul if I just keep doing this. But I was listening to these songs and I was like, I feel like I could write these songs. Like, I feel like maybe I could just be on their artist roster. And at the time, and maybe we can get into mental health, but at the time I was struggling a lot with my mental health and specifically my self-talk. Like, I wasn't encouraging myself in confident ways. I was very self-deprecating and just struggling in that area. And so I had to overcome this fear and anxiety of, if I put myself out there as an actual songwriter and not just a corporate cog in their machine or whatever, I might fail at that, and that might inform my own perspective on my levels of talent or my ability to contribute in creative ways. There was so much at stake for someone with like kind of a fragile security around their creativity at this point. So the Songfinch team, because they had seen me work hard, they were like, "Yeah, let's give it a shot. We'll send you a test opportunity. It's not a real customer, but just write a song and send it back to us, and we'll let you know what we think." Long story short, they love the song, and so fast forward to now, I still get to do this in my free time, and I've written over 100 songs for this company at this point. And I always wanted to say, I'm a paid musician because that's not easy to say these
Mhm.
days. And so I always tell youth, especially, you've got to be stubborn with the vision, but you've got to be flexible with the plan. So I
Mhm.
thought I was going to be a rock star on a stage. I ended up writing songs about dogs and anniversaries, but I was still able to be flexible with that vision of becoming a paid musician. And now I get to do that. It's really fun. It's a cool way to stay tapped into my creativity and specifically around music. And I wouldn't have had a chance to do that if I didn't take that risk and overcome that negative self
Mm.
talk.
Mm. No, thank you so much. That's really cool, Brad. And I can relate. I think I'll definitely want to talk about mental health and definitely explore that for sure. But I love what you said. Stubborn on the vision, flexible on the plan. As you were sharing, I'm like, oh man, like I've been my own life. I can relate to that because I think from a young age, my father's a teacher, and so I've always, I think, enjoyed and felt drawn to. Really, my entire career has been helping professions or service professions in some capacity. Um, but what's interesting is the journey I took to like what I thought, oh, I love to be, a teacher. I'd love to, I was in the makeup industry at one point, and certain things led me away from certain paths. But I can see all the connecting threads, but the core values that we're talking about, like it's all had the same theme. But I wouldn't have said at 36 I would be where I am now, but it's like in a positive way,
Yeah.
so that's really neat.
Yeah. Any chance we could take a detour into the makeup industry? I'm so curious. Was that like for theater and stuff, or are we talking cosmetic makeup for just
Sure.
average
Yeah,
customers?
no, yeah, it was at Sephora for a few years, and then did
Cool.
some freelance for some brands. So it was, I mean, not to make this about me, but yeah, it was, I'm just struggled with acne my whole life, and just I think that kind of out of my own wanting my confidence and wanting to like look better. Like what young adult teen doesn't want to
Yeah.
look there's a lot of pressure to look a certain way, and so I think that kind of drove my what started as frustration then kind of led me down one path. But I remember as you were talking about your time, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of the company for the music that you just shared.
Songfinch. Yeah.
Songfinch. When you were talking about you had this moment of like, oh, you're offered a supervisor role and like amazing, and then but then soon after you felt like your soul being crushed. That same thing happened at Sephora where it's nothing against the company. It was just me. I was in my role and just helping clients and as best as I can, and that's what I'm about. It's each person at a time, each moment at a time. Um, but there was this inner dread or inner heaviness where like I just like it almost like shifted one day where I came into work and I was like, like I'm not really feeling as joyful and happy about this. I'm a naturally joyful person. I try to just do things that I have responsibilities. I'm not telling anyone just do what only what makes you happy and screw everything else. I'm not saying that, but I think it got there was a point where I didn't feel fulfilled anymore, and I there was that quiet like inner message that I have to like make some changes. So.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the path for a lot of people. And I think the older that you get and the more opportunities are presented to you, the easier it is to advocate in those situations. I definitely think I think there's a season of life, especially in those transition age years where you're
Mhm.
transitioning into adulthood, where, hey, you might just have to take a couple on the chin and work some jobs you don't
Mhm.
love just to get into the repetition of
Mhm.
being on time and integrating into a team in a healthy way. Those are lessons
Mhm.
you can learn in any work context. And
Mhm.
God willing, you're able to fall into something that sort of checks those boxes later on, but then also allows you to feel more fulfilled. So it sounds like at that point in your journey, maybe you were ready to kind of punch through to the other side and be like, okay, cool. I know myself. I know who I am. I know what I want. Let's build my life in a different direction.
Yeah, no, yeah, and that's yeah, you're exactly right. And I think there was a point, and I want to talk to you about your own mental health, where you're right. There was, I'd say, from really the onset of my own mental health. We talked about this, but I'll recap for our listeners. Is, really the onset of a lot of my mental health really happened around 13, 14, and so just, I mean, could barely leave my house, couldn't look people in the eye, just, with my anxiety, depression, and, being a brain injury survivor from 4 years old. I think there was the compounding just effects of different things. And so there was a really about a 10, 11 year period where life was a struggle, even though I always knew deep down I wanted more. I just couldn't get there. When you say break past that wall, I just, you know, couldn't get there at that point. And I'd love to kind of learn about your own mental health experiences. What is that like for you? And I'd love to talk then kind of about, um, your programming at Chase, and kind of like how did you take the lessons you've learned and all the innovation and passion that we've been talking about in the keyword I have for today, transformation, Brad. We talked a lot about transformation. So,
Yeah.
uh, I'm kind of, you can see I'm weaving the plan here as we're
Yeah.
talking.
So masterfully too. Thank you. um, yeah, I think I obviously everyone has mental health. It's not like someone with good mental health doesn't have mental health concerns. Everyone is responsible for their mental health in the same way that they're responsible for their physical health. And there are going to be times in life where it's especially good, maybe, or needs some extra special attention. And in my case, I received a dual diagnosis of bipolar type 2 and of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, later in life, actually, in my late 20s. And so I'm 34 now. And like you, I had probably a solid decade of time between about ages 18 to 28 where I kind of felt like I was just adrift. I was
Mhm,
job hopping around a lot. I was not especially rooted into any relationships. Again, going back to my music years, I mean, that can be unfortunately a very transactional environment where you're
mhm,
making friends, but largely because you're both kind of trying to either build each other up in a business way or extract their talent so that this helps your thing and that thing. And that's just unfortunately sometimes how that world operates when
mhm,
everybody's just in this starving artist kind of mentality, do whatever it takes. And so I didn't have the best mental health at the time. And it went from not having the best mental health to actually having very poor mental health, to the point where I was in a very dark place, not even necessarily sure if I wanted to be alive. And got to the point where I decided I have to go see someone about this because I feel like I'm doing everything I need to do. At the time, I had a meditation practice. I was focused on mindfulness. I was in therapy. I was actually sober. I had gotten sober from alcohol
mhm,
because I identified that as something that was contributing to poor mental health. And with everything that I checked a box as far as mental health goes, and I still wasn't able to kind of get a rein on feeling consistently good, I
mhm,
decided it was time to go see someone about it. And so when I went to a psychiatrist, I got through the several hours long eval, and he
mhm,
kind of sat back in his chair and he was like, "Brad, I think I know what's going on." And I was like, "Okay, awesome. Let's get some answers here." And he said, "You have bipolar and you have OCD, and these phases of time where you're kind of over committing to things because you're so excited and passionate about things, that's actually probably tipping you into a manic state, in my case, a hypomanic state because I'm bipolar type 2. And what people don't understand about bipolar and mania is that it gives you sort of this inflated sense of confidence that wants you to be very communicative, very collaborative. It wasn't uncommon for me to come up with a business idea and decide that that was an idea that I needed to act on now and reach out to people to make it happen and think about branding and a website. And then
mhm,
all of a sudden, the mania kind of starts to taper off and you're dipping down into depressive episodes. And now you feel the shame and the guilt of, oh my gosh, I've bitten off more than I can chew. I can't actually commit to these things or these people. And then you're pulled down into that kind of tidal wave of, wow, I don't want to be here. I'm so sorry, everybody. That maybe that wasn't actually me that you were experiencing. And then you sort of just oscillate between those two phases, and it makes it very hard to be consistent with anything, with relationships, with employment, with creative ideas. That's not a good place to be. And so for me, receiving that diagnosis was very, very helpful because it allowed me for the first time to actually do two things. One, pursue the medications, the therapeutic modalities that I actually needed, as opposed to
Mhm.
just kind of experimenting and kind of self medicating with different
Mhm.
things. It also allowed me to deepen the work that I was starting to commit to at Chase because I had been an outsider of the disability community up to this point, and I've always had a heart for helping people, and I've always been interested in serving communities. But now I was an insider. This is now an emotional disturbance category in Kansas, where if I was in high school, I could actually have an IEP for this. And now I'm on my own self advocacy journey at work, telling my team, hey, this isn't personal, but this is what's going on with my mental health. And I have to figure out how to advocate just like I'm telling these kids to do in our program.
Mhm.
And so it kind of, to the second question you asked about how it informs the programming, I think the Chase program being an 8-week program, I kind of tried to distill a lot of what I had learned in that time
Mhm.
period. And so when you look at our program, you see things like how to develop a practice of positive self talk. So that when you get those opportunities like Songfinch, you take it because you're telling yourself in your own head, you're worth this, you're good enough, doesn't matter what happens. Oh, I
Oh no. Okay.
think we're
Let's.
still rolling.
Okay, we're still good. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's
So
good.
So positive self-talk is really important, and also things like a sense of gratitude. And that's actually week 3 in our program is just focusing on developing a sense of gratitude because if you're in a place that is of poor mental health, a lot of times that's stemming from kind of this lack mentality. Um,
Mhm.
you're lacking in the job you wish you had, the partner you wish you had, the life you wish you had, the money you wish you had, and all of a sudden that stuff starts to compound in a way that feels pretty darn heavy. And so if you can transition your mind to a place of gratitude where you start to focus more on what you do have, it relieves a lot of that anxiety. So
Mhm.
my own lived experience as someone with a mental health diagnosis makes me feel equipped to now serve people who are walking a mile in those same shoes.
Mhm. Mhm. Now, thank you so much, Brad. I just want to reflect back to you. Thank you for being so open and honest with your own journey, and I'm so glad you're here, Brad. I think there's there can be so much stigma sometimes in talking about mental health, and I just really appreciate your vulnerability and courage in sharing that. And I think the world needs more of that. And I do want to ask you, this is like a random like thought following up is, do you feel like culturally, what is it like being a man and talking about mental health? Because I've been thinking a lot about this, and like there's some like projects that I'm aware of that I feel like I'm just hearing more and more about men and mental health, and not that I always like think that specifically, but I'm just like just curious about what does that mean to you, and what is that like?
Gosh, that's the first time anybody's asked me, so you'll have to give me some grace here as I kind of fumble through my thoughts, I
Mm-hmm.
guess. I appreciate the question, and June was actually Men's Mental Health Awareness Month for anyone listening to this. So just last month, we had a national emphasis in the United States about men and mental health struggles and resources and advocacy. So I know that it's something that people are thinking about, and I know that the experience of being a man versus a woman or wherever you fall on the gender spectrum, I think you're going to have an experience of life on earth that is both like other humans and also unlike other humans.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as a man, and let's say as someone in a more kind of stereotypical or traditional, I'll say family unit, for example,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm a hetero man and I'm married to my wife and we have a kid, I feel a deep responsibility to be very consistent, and not just for my own sake, but because they're relying on me to do things like provide resources for the family, and my wife is relying on me to be a good support system for her so that she is in a good place to take care of our children when we're not around. And for someone who is battling bipolar, where the stigma specifically is that you're inconsistent, I mean, think about what people say about bipolar. They say it casually, like, he's so bipolar. One day he's this way, the other day he's not this way. And so there's kind of this internal pressure sometimes that I face of being a very consistent person, which I would say isn't necessarily only true of men, but I think
Mhm.
is certainly true of a traditional kind of father husband type role where you're
Mhm.
supposed to be kind of impenetrable, kind of able to weather the storm, able to provide answers all the time when nobody else is sure what's going on. So, um, yeah, I don't know if I'm getting anywhere in that thought process, but I think my heart goes out to people who are struggling with mental health and also in a role, whether that's in a workplace, in leadership, or in a family unit where they feel like there's a lot of pressure to just be this rooted, consistent person all the time. And there isn't a bunch of slack in the line to be
Mhm.
confused or have bad days or be just kind of totally off the rails and in need of things like medication and therapy and that
Mhm.
stuff. There's a lot of pressure there for sure.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your answer, Brad. And I think you're right. I can't speak for all men either. And as a gay man, my experience is a little different and there's nuances. But you're right. I think universally, I think for me, my first thought is I would just want all men to feel like they can ask for support, get help, whatever that looks like. I think. It's amazing all the resources we have now as a country and worldwide in talking about and being open that there's so many different pathways. And I appreciate you sharing that clinical care really helped you. And but also with lived experience and peer support and community care and really that specialized programming. I'm someone who calls it like the wellness buffet. I tell people like just the old ways, the cafeteria model that I call it, just like whatever like this one agency is doing is like what you get. I want everyone to feel like you can have a taste of whatever you feel is going to help you. And you've pulled in like your personal passions and creativity and being rooted in your own values and choosing what commitments and activities make you happy on a personal level. But you've also shared really concrete examples and experiences where you found clinical care really helpful. And so did I in the past. I had a wonderful therapist, Kathy. I don't know if I mentioned her on our past recording, Brad, but Kathy was an incredible therapist who came into my life as an early on in my teen years, and um, she became someone who now have like a mental flashback. I can picture my little like office I'd hang with her and have our sessions, and just it's incredible how people can come in your lives just if you give people a chance, and just it can seem scary to ask for help, and that was my little detour chat on the nuances of
Yeah.
being a man.
Yeah, I appreciate all those thoughts and agree with everything across the board. And I think two things that come to mind too that I haven't explicitly touched on. One is if we're talking about a wellness buffet, I am someone who is also a very spiritual person. And I have always felt like as a human being, we have mind, we have body, and we have spirit. There's just a level of consciousness that it feels like something's up, and it's not about our meat sack bodies, and it's not about our ability to compute math. It's like there's
Mhm.
something happening here. The reason, the same reasons that we feel love, the same reasons that we love harmonies and music and theatrical displays of hero arcs and stories and all those things can be very spiritual. And I think if you're someone who's looking at the buffet, you need to be making sure that you're also looking for the very nutrient dense meal of spirituality. That is
Mhm.
something that is going to satisfy parts of yourself that if you're not getting that, it's going to feel like you're running on dirty fuel. And there's never any condemnation or judgment around what that looks like for you, whether you're Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, mindful practices, whatever it is, anything that guides you closer to an experience of oneness with others through spirituality is going to be something that's really important to be consuming at the wellness buffet, in my opinion. That's my personal testimony. You don't have to believe me in that way, but I would encourage somebody who feels like they've tried everything else and still haven't quite figured it out to maybe go to a practice of prayer, seek some counseling from someone in a faith-based group or something like that, and just kind of explore that area and see what happens.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I remember when we first met again at a evening dinner at our conference back in May, over a fried seafood dinner, Brad. I remember we talked about spirituality. So I'm so happy you brought it up because I think it can be a missing link, and I think um, for me, I'm a spiritual person, and my own practices really enrich me. And I think you're right. There is. It can be a missing link for a lot of people, and I would never ever prescribe what someone should do, but I think bringing awareness to that is part of the wellness buffet, and just getting beyond yourself and more of that all there is.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And the second thing that you mentioned that really inspired a thought was you talked about different people kind of coming in and out of orbit. And I think that when it comes to vulnerability for men, especially, having a really good, close support system is important in your willingness to be open and honest. So, a personal example from my life is we are going into now having our second child. We're due on August 7th. So, when this comes out, maybe I'll be a dad of two at that point. I'm not sure. But two of the biggest triggers for me when it comes to my bipolar episodes are going to be a lack of sleep and stress. And when you have a new baby, you're going to be not sleeping as much and you're going to be more stressed out. And so I've been able to have really open, honest conversations with my wife and say, hey, I want to be prepared for this as we head into this season. Maybe I should ratchet up my medications, or can we have a game plan if we start to see signs of mania? And that openness and that honesty with someone that you trust that is close to you is
Mhm.
like an absolute home run when it comes to your ability
Mhm.
to have good mental health. So I would encourage anyone out there who is listening to this and struggling with mental health, yes, seek all those resources and stuff, but find the people that are closest to you and just have open, honest conversations with them.
Hmm. No, I agree wholeheartedly, and certainly I won't harp on it, but I've certainly had experiences where people were not understanding. But I do want to let our listeners know I don't want to sugarcoat or gloss over any of our listeners who have had poor experiences or people who have not understood. But I do want you all to kind of really pay attention to what Brad's been sharing, what I'm sharing, is that there are people out there who will understand you, who will accept you for as you are, and support and help is there. And so just wanted to make that note of that.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. That's important. Thank you.
And I just am remarking, Brad, on has it always come naturally to you to just, you're such a great communicator. I think, you've talked so much about your this natural advocate in you, talking about your openness, like both at work and sharing what you need, and again both the innovation on your job duties and doing that, but who you are as a person, Brad, but also how that, again, your example with talking to your wife about having the game plan. So I'm just curious, are there any lessons you've learned, or what helps you to always um, just be so open? I think that's just something that's really really helpful. And do you touch on that in your 8-week program in some capacity?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the 8-week program. You know, there's kind of like what you do at work and what you would say in a canned thing at some luncheon about the different funding sources and what the evidence is behind what you're working on. But then there's kind of what you're actually doing. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So it's like maybe you have a podcast about, like in your case, Michael, maybe you have a podcast with local entrepreneurs and nonprofit leaders and things, but it seems like what you're actually doing is just connecting with other people and trying to learn more about the human experience. Maybe that's
Mhm.
not true, but that's kind of how it feels. And so in our case, with the program, on paper, we're serving a specific demographic in a certain way. We're utilizing certain evidence based tools. But what we're really doing is trying to authentically connect and engage with families in Kansas, especially
Mhm.
families who are systems involved in all those things.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so there's going to be a lot of openness and vulnerability just baked into the way that the program
Mm-hmm.
goes.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that being, centering on the relationship. And so we focus on making sure that the people that we're putting out there in the community are relatable, that they have good communication skills, that they're modeling for young people. Hey, this is my experience. Can I hear your experience? And we're focusing on that interpersonal connection and that communication. And whether that's explicitly stated, like, hey, we're being open right now, it's baked into the programming. So it's definitely something that we're focused on. And I think also the program lasts for 8 weeks and beyond if they choose. And so once you get into that territory, it's like 1 month, they kind of trust you, they kind of don't. 2 months, you're starting to actually get pretty close. Beyond that, like that's now getting into mentor territory, someone you might
Yeah.
want to stay connected to.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just going to have a natural openness and vulnerability that sort of evolves from there because you're just more
Mm-hmm.
comfortable with that person.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in the program too, we're focusing on connection and relationships as much or more than we're focused on whatever grant requirements we're supposed to.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, no, I'm I'm smiling and laughing the combo because you're right. That was like so brilliant how you said is I think I've certainly have been there. It's, okay, how do you translate something that can be really specific or really vague in a grant, but how do you make it really meaningful and impactful? So like what you shared was incredible, and I'm just curious. Have you gotten feedback from your young adults and families on, was there any part of your program that was like the most meaningful for them, or is there any like consistent like part, or like what keeps them coming back?
Yeah, so we do post survey, self-report data, and two things that constantly stick out to me is in the qualitative data, their testimony about what they liked about the program.
Mm-hmm.
They always say, I really liked having so and so to talk with.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just had a conversation about this with my friend Edgar, and he is the executive director at a Latinx collaboration education collaborative. Anyway, I don't know what the acronym is, but he's focused on Latino representation within the education system. And he said that some of the highest outcomes that they're seeing in education is what they're calling high dosage tutoring, where even if the adult doesn't exactly know what the math skill is, as long as you're getting a youth with a trusted adult a couple times a week, 30 minutes at a time, building that relationship, it's going to instill things like work ethic and confidence in their ability to complete
Mm-hmm.
the work. And so I think I'm veering a little bit off course here, but I will say, to your question, just simply getting out in front of another person and having someone to confide in and communicate with, that's something we see all the time. And you have to wonder, where is that naturally
Mm-hmm.
going to lead when it comes to a young person finding their way? And it's going to lead to feelings of self-worth. It's going to lead to confidence and ability setting goals. And where is that going to lead? Well,
Yeah.
that's going to lead to college. That's going to lead to employment. And so you don't have to always overthink these things. It's not always about, hey, what is the nitty gritty of employment versus
Mm-hmm.
vocational rehab and all these things, which are very important. I'm not trying to be dismissive, but
Mm-hmm.
seriously,
Yeah.
sometimes you just need a trusted adult to sit down and hang out with someone,
Yeah.
and you start to see some of the best outcomes you've ever seen.
Yeah, no, I'm okay. I know. As I give you a target, we've been chatting for almost 45 minutes, and this could be a whole separate podcast. So I definitely want you back, Brad. But I think this is, we're hitting on something I could talk all day about, and I'm laughing because um, years ago, in starting a project, you know, not that within the organization they didn't have doubts, like they understood the vision, but I think some of the funders, I'm not naming names on this one, but we'll just say some of the funders weren't quite sure about the intended outcomes from the approach, and which was just like you said, Brad, is sometimes we just want to give young people a place to have connection, be seen, talk with someone, like be open, be honest, and just have that trust in those relationships, and not always have everything prescribed down to the last second. And I think that like fizzled out some minds who were again used to the old cafeteria way of thinking. And so I love that you really brought it back to, well, you have to like have faith and trust in what we're doing here is, okay, because if you're clearly seeing the impact we're making. And I think I'm going back, a million miles now in my own brain is, like I shared, my therapist Kathy. I can easily name a ton of trusted adults and mentors from my young adulthood who, it could be as simple as them being kind and asking how I was doing and checking in and just not coming with any preconceived notions or judgment. Like all those people and experiences built me up in ways I never had. Having had a lot of adverse experiences, those people were a shining example of like just me, like we talked about, combating that negative self-talk and those beliefs I picked up. And so as much as I feel like the work we're doing is helping young people and families and communities to learn things, we're also here to help them unlearn things like the unworthiness, the shame, and just hearing you talk about just we need that the one-on-one time, that connection. I have a colleague and friend who said, shame grows in silence, and just having that openness and all these things are just incredible. Those relationships, and it's affirming to hear you just say just takes that and no, that's incredible, and I want our listeners to really pay attention to, just it just takes connection, and I can get frustrated sometimes, Brad. Maybe you agree with this. Is I as a recovering perfectionist, I'm not gonna like be upset at anyone who is a perfectionist on this, but sometimes I think the system, some people are maybe afraid to step up or step into something because they don't know. But I think there's such a power in that's like half of life, right, Brad? I feel like half of my success, I'll use air quotes, is a just being a good, nice person. Like that gets you so far. It just don't be an a-hole, don't be a
Yeah.
jerk. Rule one. And
Yeah.
two, just like, you don't have to be perfect. Just try it out. Like you said, taking risks. And I think if you can, I think if a lot of people understood those two keys right there, just giving people a chance, the opportunity. What are your thoughts on what I just shared, Brad?
Man, well, I think first of all, if you're struggling with perfectionism, that's relatable and that's understandable, especially given the current climate of social media and all the things that we understand to be true for pressures to fit in as a young person or a young adult, especially. But you need to eradicate that from your vocabulary. Perfect is not something that exists, and I would even argue that it would be very disinteresting if it did exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that so much of the most beautiful lessons that I've learned in life have come with some great mistakes. And I think that some of my most courageous abilities to serve others has come from deep, dark, emotional moments. And so I'm not suggesting that you should go find deep, dark, emotional moments. I am suggesting that you get rid of the idea that you should be perfect because that's never going to happen. And you use any pain or turmoil or struggle or adversity that you've encountered, and you flip that on its head and say, how do I use this as my superhuman ability to serve others in that same situation? And so I guess my first thought is, who cares, dude? Don't be perfect. You're never going to be perfect. And that's actually an amazing gift to humanity. It's what makes us human in the first place. Um, to your point about kind of this hesitation around systems and how those operate, I don't want to be completely misheard because I do believe that structures and encouraging programmatic systems and data and research, I believe in those things. And I think they're important, especially when it comes to accountability and growth. If you're trying to get your work out to more people, I just think it's a balance. And I think that some of the greatest leaders we've had over the course of history have been people that were up on the cliff looking over to the other side, turning around saying, no, it's actually fine if we do this. I've got this idea and I can see a vision for this. But meanwhile, everybody's at the base of the mountain, going like, I don't know, man. It's easier down here. We figured out the climate and the atmosphere down here. If we go up there, we're going to be struggling to breathe, and it's stormy up there, and all this stuff. And I think it's okay to take those risks, even and especially if you're a leader, because if nothing else, like we've already talked about, you're going to have the knowledge now and maybe even learn from that mistake. And you can say, okay, cool. Yeah, everybody was right. we are on the right track. Or you can say, oh my gosh, guys, I found this completely different, better way of doing things, and everybody, let's go in this direction now. It's a win-win either way.
Yeah, no, and I'm thinking back as you're sharing, Brad. And right, maybe I'll loop back for a second. Maybe I was a little too strong in saying, "Listen, system, you gotta like do this." And you're right. I think I'll rephrase and say I don't take back what I said, but I will say there needs to be harmony. That's what I'll just say. Is yes, those structures and all what you shared is important, but I think that's like the at least in my what I'm seeing a lot of it's I think there's just a lack of flexibility and innovation and just being okay with like you can let the reins go a little bit on some of that and you as you've been sharing Brad during our whole time talking there's this magic that happens when you just give that flexibility and opportunity and chance and even if it's a little messy in the moment it's gonna be okay
Yeah, I agree. And I think where our work has been interesting over the last year, especially as we're plopping around in these different communities in Kansas, is I feel like you do see a lot more of that innovation and that rope to be creative given out at the local level. Because
hmm
anytime you grow and you expand, I don't know, it's hard, but you can't, it's hard to avoid some of those more bureaucratic aspects of
hmm
infrastructure, basically. But if you're operating at the local level and even to zoom even further, like we're talking about at the one on one level, you can be really creative with conversations and collaborations. And at a local community level, you can listen to what the community needs and respond to that need specifically. As you move up the ranks of at the state level and the national level, I mean,
hmm
I think there's just something about building infrastructure that big that makes it hard to avoid some of those systems, as
hmm
straining as that can feel, you know?
hmm
Is that making sense?
No, it is, and actually, it's going to be so random. I love reading books, and there's one book. It's making me think of it's the Martha Rules by Martha Stewart, and she talks. It's really her business experience, and I remember ever since I read it, I love what she shared. It's you need both. If I'm recapping, Martha, if you ever listen, if I'm wrong, love to hang out with you, talk. But it's she talked about really as a leader and as an entrepreneur and business, really almost anything, right? You need to shift your perspective. I remember she talked about you need both the microscope, which I'll think of as the local level, and you need the telescope, big picture, infrastructure, national level. And so I think, again, going back to the harmony and knowing how are you proceeding with what is if I'm making sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And to bring it home on the musical note, even the word harmony, I think, is something that I think about often. And in music, if you're hitting a sequence of notes and one of them is out of tune, you're creating discordant, there's no harmony there. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times, whether that's at the individual level, like maybe your mental health, you're crushing it, your physical health, you're crushing it, but you're lacking in spiritual health, kind of like we were talking about. That's that third note in the harmony that's a little discordant, and then everything else kind of starts to wobble and feel out of place. And I think sometimes as you grow through the ranks of larger and larger projects, uh, you're making less jazz at that point. You're restrained. I don't know how deep you want to go down the music rabbit hole though, but essentially you become more invested in how to stay within the scales and explore less than you could at the local level. We've gone off track. Also, Martha Stewart is such an interesting and fascinating person. I saw that documentary on her probably a year or so ago. Man, that woman is just an anomaly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, she's always. I mean, talk about innovation. Every time I see her, it's new this, new that. All her shows, and um, I give her so much credit and admiration that she's just someone who is constantly innovating and adapting and changing. And I think that's something I'm learning. And so I'm just curious, Brett. I want to respect our time. We're getting close to an hour here. But I just would love to maybe a few final thoughts, and then
Yeah,
I'll give it
yeah.
back to you to close us out. But I think are there any top lessons? And you've talked about this already, but I guess are there any top lessons you feel like that you've learned from your experiences and how that's really shaping who you are and maybe where you see yourself the next 5 years, 10 years?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. And always happy to do more episodes. I feel like me and you are just gasoline on fire, and we could yap and yap for
Yeah,
hours and
maybe
hours.
it's maybe we can something with harmony or transformation. I was just thinking, well, we'll keep talking, Brad.
Yeah, I think one of the most important lessons that I've learned on a professional level since 2020 when the Chase program started was the old I think it's an African proverb, which is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far,
Hmm.
go together. And I
Uh,
think there's just so much wisdom in that because at the beginning of something new, if you are an entrepreneurial person or a creative person, it's really exciting and those ideas can be flowing. And without very many people to collaborate with or talk to, there's sort of this liberating feeling of I can go as fast as I want and I can go wherever I want. But I will say that is only exciting for a very short blip in time,
mhm,
and it's not very sustainable because if something that you're doing is adding value to the community, inevitably it's going to want to grow on its own. Those things just kind of want to expand on their own because they become attractive to more people. And so you have to be willing to loosen the reins, bring other people in who are as or more talented and interesting than you are, and shine a light on them and say, how do you add your specific vision for how you see good communities to operate,
mhm,
and start to go far with more people. Like remove your ego, remove
mhm,
yourself as the
mhm,
face of whatever it is that you think this is that helps you sleep at night, and bring in more cool people because I guarantee you the project will be a lot more sustainable and satisfying. So that would be the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is Chase has this moniker of chasing your dreams.
mhm,
And for so long in my own life, my dream was to do things like be a successful entrepreneur, sell a company and retire at an early age, be a Grammy nominated musician. It was these really super ambitious goals that at the end of the day were only fueling into my own self seeking desires. It didn't have much to do with other people. And the more youth that I work with, and the more times I hear things like, I want to be a famous YouTuber, I want to be an influencer, I want to be a star athlete, the more I start to push back on that and say, yes, but how does that dream optimize not for your own well being, but for the well being of your community? And so, what I would love to see from more young people are big, 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 huge dreams of huge service to others. All right. Not how am I going to make enrich my own life for my own personal gain,
mhm,
but how am I going to lift everyone up around me and start to think of success as sacrifice and
mhm,
service. So, those would be the two things I've learned.
mhm. Success, service, sacrifice. Yeah, so many great things, Brad. And I think we can maybe for another recording, whichever we hop on. You heard it here, folks. Well, Brad and I are going to keep collaborating, doing a ton of things and conversations. But I think you've hit on something really big there, where it's I think we've each shared our own experiences of the dream we thought that would fulfill us or make us happy, or a plan we had. Our natural detours and experiences and a lot of ways have led to something better and more fulfilling. And so I think there is this natural distilling that natural beauty of, we would never tell someone no, but just to bring awareness to what's the big picture. And I love what you shared about, you know, being of service. And as you were talking, our Street Smart Ventures logo is like the path. There's like the check mark and like for success and like the pathways and some of our other logos. And, I'm someone who, in my role as an adult ally, you know, I'm always thinking about, okay, like there's my allies and advisors and mentors and people, family and friends who are beside me. Some are ahead of me and I'm looking to them, but there's also other people who are behind me. And that's not like meant any type of way, but it's just that like we each have our own lessons and there's just such a beauty in learning from each other. And I think finding more ways to bring that, again, the harmony, the learning, the connection, the relationships. We talked about so many things, Brad, and I just, what are your thoughts on that? Any other kind of closing thoughts for our time together?
Well, first, I just want to say that I really appreciate the conversation always, Michael, and I appreciate the invite. And I hope that anyone listening to this, if you found something that we've said to be insightful or interesting, I would encourage you to just act on it. There's a lot of waiting around that you can do in life, and don't do anything hyper risky or anything. But if you're excited about something, go ahead and try it. So I think I would leave with just encouraging people to do everything that we've talked about. Try to surround yourself with a good support system that you can be open and honest and vulnerable with, whether that's about your mental health, your disability, your family life, the shame and guilt that you need to shed about whatever behaviors are in your past. You can let go of all that kind of stuff. I would also encourage people to enter into a more spiritual existence if they're not used to that. That's something that's very important to my life. And then lastly, again, just take inventory of what it is that you see for your life and really ask yourself, is this self-seeking, or is this something that's going to build up others around me? Because in my own personal experience, and I'm not trying to project anything onto anybody, in my own personal experience, I feel actually satisfied when that's what I do. In old experiences that were self-seeking, when you hit those milestones, it's exciting for a day, and then you're almost starving for the next bigger, better thing, the next trophy, the next shiny object. Inevitably, you will obtain that with time and hard work, and then you'll be in an even deeper place of needing to keep fueling that thing. And that is just not a I want to get people thinking that that's not cool. Like that to me, that's not cool. And what would be cool is if we saw the dreamers out there taking those energies and talents and infusing them at the local levels into their communities with innovation that's sustainable because it's for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said, Brad. Well, could not have asked for a better closing remark. So, again, I just want to thank you, Brad, so much for your generosity and sharing about yourself, your experiences, the work you're doing. It's been a pleasure. I can't wait to chat more and collaborate more. And on a closing note, where can our listeners find you if they're interested in connecting with you and your work?
Yeah, so you can look us up on the internet. We are Families Together. That's the PTI. Our program is called Chase, and our Chase program does have an Instagram account. It's Chase_program. You can listen to our podcast, which Michael will be starring in our most recent episode. It's called Chase Your Dreams, and you can get that on Spotify and Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Yeah, I think those would be the plugs for now. And again, I'm super excited to keep this conversation rolling because you've got so much insight in the way that you communicate, and everything that you say, I feel like inspires me in a different way. And so I just really appreciate the time and the space to interact with you today.
I feel the same way, Brad. And this, I could keep talking to you for hours. So unfortunately, I want to respect your time. You're a busy man.
Yeah.
But I just, again, thank you so much, Brad. It's been a true honor to share space with you and learn from you. I've learned so much every time I talk with you. So there's mutual respect from my end. And for our listeners, thank you so much. And until next time, bye for now.